Okay, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the BI Washington Policy Pulse. Again, my name is Nathan Dean. I'm coming to you from the Washington, D.C. Bureau. Joining me today is Elliot Stein, our senior litigation analyst up in New York City. Today's going to be a fairly short call, I think. There's not a ton going on in Washington, just with the campaign trail now, essentially just under a month away until the election. We're going to see a lot of campaign stops over swing states this week, but I did want to highlight a couple of things that, for policy perspective, I think that's important to note. First off, I just briefly mentioned before the call about the hurricane in Florida. There is some talk about potentially bringing Congress back to do a hurricane relief bill. This was originally set up for Hurricane Helene, but with Hurricane Milton now bearing down on the Tampa Bay, Orlando region of Florida, there is talk that President Biden had suggested bringing Congress back before the election to do a supplemental funding bill. Senate is somewhat open to it. The House, on the other hand, may not be. It should also be noted that FEMA got an additional funding as part of that supplemental bill that passed to stave off the government shutdown. So we'll see if Congress does want to come back or not, but something to keep in mind. As of right now, it doesn't sound like they're going to do that. Other things going on, Senator Hagerty of Tennessee is potentially going to drop a new crypto bill. Look, again, why do you drop a crypto bill so close to the election? Well, it's partly fundraising, but it's also partly to notify other people that come 2025, you're going to be working on this and you're going to just want to give your colleagues the heads up that, hey, here's a bill that we're going to be pushing, so keep that in mind. I haven't seen the text or anything like that, but I hear it's very close to what the House Financial Services Committee, the Financial Innovation and Technology Act bill. We'll see about that. Just in terms of schedule this week, President Biden is off to Germany and Angola later this week, so I expect a quiet tail end of the week from the White House. Also wanted to give the shout out to Elliot and I's podcast, Votes and Verdicts. There's a little bit of chatter online at the moment talking about Dan Gallagher, the chief legal officer of Robinhood, potentially being the next SEC chair if President Trump were to win. The reason why I'm calling that out is Elliot and I actually had Commissioner Gallagher on our podcast earlier this year, and one of the questions we specifically asked him was, what would you do if you were SEC chair? And some of the answers were like things like, well, we'll do a crypto bill or crypto legislation. He would actually go back to a lot of the votes that he lost as commissioner of the SEC on a 3-2 and look and revisit some of those rules. So kind of an interesting discussion. While Elliot's speaking, I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat for the Zoom so you can listen to it if you will. If not, you can always reach out to me and let me know. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about before I turn it over to Elliot is really just heads up. If we've been hearing some chatter that the Federal Reserve may want to move forward with its proposal on regional bank long-term debt. If you remember, this is a proposal that came out there that would require regional banks above 100 billion in assets to issue long-term debt to safeguard against systemic risk. Now, it had always been anticipated that this rule would go in cahoots with the Basel III endgame, but with the Basel III endgame not really going anywhere at the moment, just remember the FDIC, this is CFPB Director Rohit Chopra, who's a member of the FDIC board, doesn't seem to be on board with the Fed and the FDIC in terms of moving forward with this softened proposal. So Basel III endgame doesn't seem to be going anywhere at the moment. So what happens with the regional bank long-term debt rule? Well, we've heard that the Fed potentially could be finalizing that fairly soon. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is that if they were to do it, say, next week, don't be surprised if later this week you see a notification out there saying, hey, the Fed is going to do this. They may do it after the election, but just to keep in mind, this thing could happen. We do think that there's going to be some tweaks to this, maybe some provisions related to the denomination. Also, I do think that they potentially could push this up to 250 billion in banks and assets as opposed to 100 billion in assets. That's what they did with the Basel III endgame. It makes somewhat sense if they were to do that with the regional bank rules. So again, just keep that in mind. So the reason why Elliot's joining the call this week is last week I didn't get to see the vice presidential debate live. I was actually at Disney World. So what I'm going to do is ask Elliot to come on and talk about the vice presidential debate and give us his thoughts and the team's thoughts on what does the debate mean for policy, and does it ultimately impact the election and where we go from here?
Great. Thanks, Nathan. So I would just, before I get into the vice presidential debate, just on Hurricane Milton, our insurance, our PNC insurance team, led by Matt Palazzolo, whose head you can see behind me if you're watching this on Zoom. They put out a note this morning saying that the insured losses from from the hurricane could be in the tens of billions of dollars. So I recommend his note on that. Um, and then Nathan and I also did a webinar last week on the impacts of the election on the financial sector, along with our colleagues Allison Williams, Herman Chan, and Arnold Kakuta. So I recommend listening to that as well if you're interested in that topic. Turning to the VP debate, you know, not a ton of surprises, I think, in terms of policies. I think maybe the biggest surprise was just in terms of style, in that it was a relatively civil debate, especially compared to some of the other ones that we've seen, and a little more substantive and less mudslinging than what we've gotten accustomed to, I think. In terms of the policies, one thing that stood out to me was that there was no policy discussion at all about financial regulation or about tech regulation. So that was interesting. What the candidates did talk about was as follows. Governor Walz, who's obviously the governor of Minnesota, the Democratic nominee for vice president, he touted the benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act, right? One of the key legislative achievements of the Biden administration. And, we've written extensively that if Harris were to win, they would continue to lean into the IRA and continue its the policies that stem from it. In particular, Governor Walz talked about promoting electric vehicle usage and clean energy. The IRA has a lot of tax credits for initiatives related to those, as well as reduced drug pricing. And our colleague Dwayne Wright has written extensively about the drug pricing negotiations that are part of the IRA. And then Governor Walz also was supportive of the Affordable Care Act, which is not surprising. So we would expect to see that legislation continue as it has under the Biden administration. For his part, Senator Vance on the Republican side, talked about promoting tariffs on goods coming from China, right, which is a key part of the Trump administration's policy proposals. Senator Vance also talked about increased domestic energy production, and he mentioned sort of in passing reduced taxes, particularly for companies engaged in more domestic production on the manufacturing side. Senator Vance was sort of vague on healthcare policies, I would say. It seemed like he sort of took credit or promoted the Trump administration taking credit for sort of saving the Affordable Care Act, which seemed a little incongruous from what actually happened. But he sort of just mentioned healthcare policies in passing without a lot of specifics. And that was about it. Again, nothing on financial regulation or tech regulation. And there were a lot of other things discussed that we don't really write about, including immigration and abortion and things like that. But all in all, I thought it was an interesting debate. Again, not a lot of mudslinging, so it was a little less painful to watch.
Yeah, and so I would just say that we're not sure if there's going to be a third debate or not. The date of October 23rd has been pushed out as a potential debate. We'll find out over the next week or so if ultimately that's going to take place or not. But we should just note that within 30 days left of the election, we are constantly updating our notes now. I would also say that I just pulled up the latest Real Clear Politics data that's on the terminal, and almost every single week I'll say that Kamala Harris is favored or President Trump is favored. This week it's President Trump with 281 electoral college votes. Remember, you need 270, and it just means it's entirely so close. I mean, this really has the reason why this would be this case is that it has President Trump winning North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. and it has Kamala Harris winning Pennsylvania. So it's one of those things where we're just going to see over and over. But I want to stop it there just because I know we've gone long in the last couple of weeks. Today's going to be a shorter call. If you do have any questions or anything you want to reach out, please reach out to us. But again, I want to say thank you very much for attending, and we wish you a great week. Thank you.